How many times have you said it? I just need more time. More time to get in shape, more time to start that project, more time to work on yourself, or more time to become the person you've always wanted to be. It's one of the most common things that we say as human beings. In fact, we say it so often that we rarely stop to question it. But what if I gave you another hour every day? Would your life automatically change? Or what if I gave you another day for every week? Would you finally start? Or what if I gave you another year? Would that be the thing that finally unlocks the future you've been imagining? Maybe, maybe not. Because if we're being honest, many of us have had seasons where we had more time than we knew what to do with. And yet somehow, the change we wanted still didn't happen. Why? Because sometimes the problem isn't the clock. Sometimes it's the weight, the old story you're still carrying, the mistake you haven't forgiven yourself for, or the fear that keeps whispering, not yet. The belief that says you're not ready, not qualified, not capable, or not enough. Imagine trying to move forward whilst carrying a backpack filled with things you no longer need. Every step takes more effort. Every hill feels steeper. Every destination feels farther away than it really is. And after a while, you begin to think the problem is distance, when in reality, it might be the weight. So today, I want to explore a possibility with you. What if you don't need more time? What if you're closer than you think? And what if the next chapter of your life doesn't begin by adding something new, but by releasing something you've been carrying for far too long? Are you ready? I am. I'm Jonah. I'm your person. Let's get to it. Welcome back to the show. Whether you're listening from Seattle, Toronto, Sydney, London, Cape Town, or one of the many places around the world where this show has found a home, thank you for being here. And wherever you are, I'm glad we get to spend this time together. Now, let's start with something almost all of us have said. I just need more time. Have you noticed how often that phrase shows up in our lives? We say it when we're overwhelmed. We say it when we're putting something off. We say it when we're frustrated that we're not making the progress we'd hoped to make. I'll start when things calm down, we say. I'll focus on that after this busy season. I'll get serious about it when I have more time. The challenge is that life has a funny way of moving the finish line. One busy season becomes another. One obligation turns into 3. One reason becomes a dozen more. And before we know it, months and months have passed. Sometimes years. Have you ever looked back and realized you've been waiting for the perfect moment? The moment when work gets easier, or the moment when stress disappears, the moment when your schedule finally opens up, or worse yet, the moment when we feel completely ready. Here's the truth. Life rarely sends us an invitation that says, "Congratulations! Everything is now perfectly aligned. You may begin." Life keeps moving. The calendar keeps turning, and the perfect moment often remains just out of reach. That doesn't mean you're lazy, and it doesn't mean you're unmotivated, and it certainly doesn't mean you've failed. It simply means you've accepted an idea that most of us have accepted at one point or another, that the thing standing between us and the life we want is more time. But what if that's not the real obstacle? What if we've been looking at the clock when we should have been looking somewhere else? Because if time isn't the problem, then we need to ask ourselves a different question. And that question might change everything. Let's explore that possibility together in part 2. Here in part 2, we're going to talk about the invisible anchor. If I were to ask you what's holding you back right now, what would you say? Would you say more time, money, opportunity, or even energy? Maybe. But let's look a little bit deeper. Have you ever misplaced your phone whilst you were still holding it in your hand? Or searched for your glasses only to realize they were already on your face or on top of your head? It's funny when it happens, but it also reveals something important. Sometimes the things closest to us are hardest to see. The same thing happens in our lives. Most people don't realize that they're carrying something because they've been carrying it for so long. Maybe it's a disappointment from years ago. Maybe it's a mistake you still replay in your mind. Maybe it's a comment someone made that you never forgot. Maybe it's a belief that sounded true when you were 15 or 25 or 35, but no longer belongs to the person you've become. Over time, these things become familiar, and familiar things rarely get questioned. Instead, they become part of the background, part of the story, part of your identity. And here's the thing. Have you ever caught yourself saying something like, "That's just who I am. I've always been this way. I could never do that. I missed my chance." Those statements sound harmless, but what if they're not observations? What if they're old conclusions that have now become your reality? Because old conclusions have a way of quietly shaping new decisions. They influence what we attempt, what we avoid, what we believe is possible. And eventually, they begin to create resistance, not because they're true, but because we've stopped examining them. That's why some people can have plenty of time and still feel stuck. The obstacle isn't always in front of them, though. That's the thing. Sometimes it's something they've been carrying behind them. And if we're going to move forward, we have to become willing to ask a simple question. What am I still carrying that no longer belongs in my future? Because before we can release anything, we have to see it. And that's where we're headed next. All right, let's take this one step further. What if the thing that's slowing us down isn't an event? What if it's a story? Not a story we tell other people, a story you tell yourself. Because whether you realize it or not, every one of us carries a collection of beliefs about who we are. Some of those beliefs have served us well. Others were formed during moments when we had limited information, limited experience, and limited perspective. Think about that for a second. Have you ever made a decision about yourself during a difficult season? Maybe you failed at something and decided you weren't capable. Maybe someone rejected you and you decided you weren't enough. Maybe you took a risk and you got hurt and decided it was safer to not try again. The event ended. But the story remained. And here's what's fascinating. Most people don't live according to reality. They live according to the story they've accepted as reality. If I believe I'm bad with money, I'll make decisions that reinforce that. If I believe I'm not a leader, I'll avoid opportunities to lead. If I believe I've missed my chance, I'll stop looking for new ones. Not because those things are true, but because the story feels true. And I'm going to pause for a second because in one of my previous episodes, I talked about how when we say things out loud or we think about them internally, the brain plans around that. It plans for you to be defensive. It plans for you to, let's say, avoid something. And here's the thing. What feels true often feels most powerful than what it actually is. So let me ask you something. What story are you still living inside? Is it possible that you've outgrown it? Is it possible that the person sitting here with me today is not the same person who created the story years ago? Because growth changes things. Experience changes things. Wisdom changes things. And maybe one of the reasons you're feeling stuck isn't because you need more time. Maybe it's because you're trying to build a new future whilst operating from an old story. Sorry, my voice gave out. You're operating from an old story. And if that's true, then the next question becomes incredibly important. Who would you be without that story? Let's explore that in part 4. There's something interesting that happens when we carry a story long enough. We stop questioning it. At first, it's something that happened to us. Then it becomes something we believe about ourselves. A setback becomes, I'm not successful. A rejection becomes, I'm not enough. A mistake becomes, I'm not capable. Have you ever noticed how easy it is to take one moment from your life and turn it into a permanent definition? It's almost as if we allow one chapter to tell the story of the entire book. But that's not how books work. And it's not how people work either. You are more than your worst day. You're more than your biggest mistake. You're more than the opinion someone formed about you years ago. Yet many people continue living as though these moments have the final say. The problem isn't that the event happened. The problem is that the event got promoted. It moved from being an experience to becoming an identity. And once something becomes part of your identity, it begins influencing your choices, what you pursue, what you avoid, what you believe is possible, and what you think you deserve. And here's where this connects to today's episode. If the thing holding you back is an old story about who you are, then more time won't solve it. A month from now, you'll still be carrying it. A year from now, you'll still be carrying it. That's why this isn't really a conversation about time. It's a conversation about awareness. Because awareness gives us a chance to challenge what we've accepted as truth. And here's your challenge for this week. Think of one belief you've been carrying about yourself for a long time. Then ask, is this who I am? Or is this a story I've repeated so often I've mistaken it for the truth? Don't judge your answer, and don't judge yourself. Just notice it for now. Sometimes the first step toward freedom isn't changing your life. It's seeing it clearly. Let's talk about why letting go feels so strange here in part 5. If some of the things we've been carrying no longer serve us, then why is it so hard to let them go? The answer is surprisingly simple. Because familiar feels safe. Even when it isn't helping us. Even when it's limiting us. Even when it's making us miserable. Human beings are fascinating that way. We often assume we'll cling to what makes us happy. But more often, we cling to what feels familiar. Think about it. Have you ever stayed in a situation longer than you should have? God knows I have. It could be a job, a relationship, a habit, a way of thinking. Not because it's helping you, but because it was known. Because uncertainty can feel uncomfortable. And sometimes the known discomfort feels safer than the unknown possibility. And the same things happen with us when we tell ourselves different types of stories. If I've spent years believing I'm not capable, that belief becomes familiar. If I've spent years always believing I'm behind, that becomes familiar. If I've spent years believing that success belongs to other people, that belief becomes familiar. And familiarity has a strange way of disguising itself as truth. But familiar and true are not the same thing. And I'm writing a show on that for episode 83. Make sure you join me for that one. Let me say it again. Familiar and true are not the same thing. Just because you've carried a belief for a long time doesn't mean it belongs in your future. And just because you've repeated a story for years over and over again doesn't mean it's accurate. And perhaps that's why growth can feel so uncomfortable at first. Not because something's wrong, but because you're stepping outside of what you've always known. You're questioning assumptions. You're challenging old conclusions. And you're creating space for new possibility. And that can feel strange. I've been there too. I mean, it still happens today when I'm stepping outside of my comfort zone, particularly with the show and the way it's growing. It can feel strange. But strange isn't always bad. Sometimes strange is the feeling of growth. And if that's true, then maybe the discomfort you're feeling isn't a warning sign. Maybe it's evidence that something is finally beginning to change. Let's put that idea into practice here in part 6. By now, you may have identified something you've been carrying. An old belief, an old story, an old conclusion about who you are and what is possible for your life. And maybe you've realized something important. The goal was never to carry it forever. Think about nature for a moment. Trees don't cling to every leaf. They let them go. Not because the leaves are bad, and not because the leaf failed, but because they've served their purpose. And growth requires making room for what's next. Human beings aren't that different. Yet so many of us spend years trying to hold on to things we've already outgrown. Old identities, old fears, old regrets, old definitions of ourselves. And then we wonder why moving forward feels so difficult. Imagine trying to climb a mountain whilst carrying a backpack full of bricks. You could become stronger, or you could become faster, and you could become more disciplined, or you could put the backpack down. That's what this episode has really been about. Not becoming more, but carrying less. Because sometimes the breakthrough isn't found in what you add to your life. It's found in what you're willing to release. So here's your challenge for this week, number 2. Choose one thing you've been carrying that no longer serves you, whether it's a belief or an assumption or one old story. Then spend the next 7 days acting as if it no longer is in charge. Not forever, just 7 days. Notice what changes. Notice what becomes possible. Notice how differently you move through the world. Because you may discover something surprising. You never needed more time. You simply needed less weight. And with that realization, let's bring this conversation home in part 7. As we begin to wrap up, I want to leave you with one final thought. What if you're closer than you think? Not to perfection, not to having all the answers, and not to some magical version of your life where every problem disappears, but closer to the person you're becoming, closer to the life you're trying to build, or closer to the goals you've been trying to work so hard toward. Sometimes we assume progress requires a massive breakthrough, or a huge opportunity, a dramatic transformation. But often, progress looks much simpler than that. It's letting go of one belief that no longer serves you, or one story that no longer fits, or one assumption that no longer deserves authority over your life. That's how change happens. Not all at once. One layer at a time. One powerful choice at a time. One realization at a time. And maybe that's the message I hope you take with you today. You don't have to become someone else. You don't have to wait for life to slow down. You don't have to wait until everything is perfect. And you don't have to earn the right to move forward. You can begin from where you are, with what you have right now. Because the future you've been hoping for may not be waiting for more time. It may be waiting for a different decision, or a different belief, or a different perspective. And if that's true, then perhaps the next chapter of your life doesn't begin when you finally have more time. Perhaps it begins the moment you stop carrying what no longer belongs in your future. And that's a beautiful place to begin. Now let's bring it home. So before we go, I want you to remember something. You are not behind. You are not late. And you do not need to wait for a perfect moment to begin moving toward the life you want. Life will continue to be busy, and there will always be responsibilities, obligations, distractions, and reasons to put things off until tomorrow. But tomorrow has a funny way of becoming next week, and next week has a funny way of becoming next year. So, if there's one thing I hope you'll take away from today's conversation, it's this. Don't spend your life waiting for more time when what you really need is a new perspective. Take a look what you've been carrying. Question the stories you've accepted. Challenge the beliefs you've stopped examining. And give yourself permission to release what no longer belongs in your future. Because you may be much closer than you think. Closer to growth, closer to healing, closer to confidence, and maybe closer to becoming the person you've always known that you can be. Thank you for spending part of your day with me. I appreciate you more than you know. And if nobody has told you lately, I'm rooting for you. I always will be. For now, thanks for hanging out. Thanks for coming back. And until next time, have a great week. Take care.